we'll get started. I want to introduce Robin and Evelyn from Enterprise Community Partners, joining us today to talk about affordable housing finance. Going in a deep dive, I'll let them introduce themselves in a little more depth, but thank you so much. Let's get started.
Hi, everyone. Excited to see you here. I can't see you, but I know you can see me, and I imagine we have some familiar faces from the group that we worked with and spent a day with just a couple weeks ago, really, in Reno. And so excited to have the opportunity to dive deeper into this housing finance session with you. As Joanna said, we are Robin Wolf. I'm the Director of Rural Housing. I'm joined here by my colleague, Evelyn Eminen, and we are with Enterprise Community Partners, and we're partnering with the Nevada Housing Coalition on these trainings and a series of trainings which will ultimately inform and lead to a toolkit and developer guide for tailored to the state of Nevada to really help new folks access affordable housing development, to get a better understanding of affordable housing development for partners who might not be in that space right now, or to even deepen our bench, right, as we work as organizations throughout the state to develop and to preserve affordable housing in our communities. These trainings and the guide will be a resource for you going forward. So Evelyn, I think we can go next. The purpose of our training today is to really talk about affordable housing finance. We didn't get a chance to get into this very much on our one-on-one. We're going to learn about some of the statewide resources, regional resources, federal resources. We'll be talking about LIHTC, or the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, and local opportunities, and really get hands-on into the development financial model, which will help us to understand some back of the envelope calculations and how we can think about financial feasibility before affordable housing developments. And a little bit about Enterprise. Our mission is to make home and community places of pride, power, and belonging, and platforms for resilience and upward mobility for all. Pride, power, and belonging is really important to us. We want the residents we serve to feel like they have, they're proud of where they live, and to foster that and to continue that for them as projects expire, as projects are built, thinking about how we as affordable housing providers can be part of that. And our vision is to have a country where home and community are stepping stones to more. We do this with 3 pillars: increasing the housing supply, so thinking about production and preservation. That's what we'll talk about today. How do we develop new housing? How do we repurpose, rehabilitate, or preserve housing with our financial tools? We also focus on advancing racial equity and building resilience and upward mobility. And we have a three-pronged approach to that. Evelyn and I sit on the solutions team and the nonprofit arm of Enterprise that works on advocacy, education, and technical assistance. We also have a community development arm. Most of that, our portfolio, is in the Mid-Atlantic. We build and preserve and own and operate affordable housing in the Mid-Atlantic region of the country. And then Enterprise is also well known for our capital divisions, including tax credit syndication and our Enterprise Community Loan Fund, which is a CDFI, or Community Development Financial Institution, that provides debt and projects. So those are the kind of the 3 pillars and how Enterprise works. See a question in the chat about whether or not these slides will be available after. Yes, you will be able to get a full deck of slides after everybody who's registered will get an email from Joanna with slides and a survey. So hopefully you'll fill out the survey when you get those slides. Next slide. And so a little bit more about our team and what we do on our team at Enterprise. As I said, I'm the Director of Rural Housing. Evelyn as a program officer on the Rural Communities and Tribal Nations team. Our team has the ability to provide grants provided under HUD Section 4. These are pre-development grants on average ranging from about $50,000 up to $100,000 per project to work on pre-development and organizational capacity building. We also have direct training and capacity building work. This is under that body of work, training that we provide to help lift up and build capacity within organizations to develop affordable housing. We also do advocacy, so thinking on the state level about policies that might be put in place to help with the production and preservation of affordable housing and to protect tenants in their homes. And again, I think training is sort of covered under capacity building, but broader trainings like this are also part of our body of work. And I will pass along to Evelyn.
Great. Hello, good to be here today. I want to provide a brief land acknowledgement of the Great Basin tribes of the Washoe, Northern Paiute, Southern Paiute, and Western Shoshone groups that were the original stewards of the land in the state of Nevada. And I also want to take that land acknowledgement and move it towards a recognition that today there are 20 federally recognized tribes, and 17 of those receive Indian Housing Block Grant funds. So it's really important to acknowledge that Native tribes and Native American people are a part of the housing ecosystem as providers as well as constituents. And so if you are representative of any of these groups, our team is motivated to provide additional assistance if you wanted to reach out to us. We acknowledge that there are some resources and some challenges with development on trust land in particular that we're not necessarily going to cover today, but I hope you would learn something beneficial regardless. So today's agenda, we have a longer webinar planned because there's a lot to cover. But if you have to jump off for a meeting, this is something to keep in mind. We're going to kind of get you started with intro and level setting and what is affordable housing session that's going to be a little bit more tailored to the finance side of things than those of you that were at our first session in Reno. At around 11:30, we should be at the securing funding stage of the presentation, and the pro forma hands-on demonstration is going to take over around noon, and then our last section is going to be understanding LIHTC. And throughout this, we have a lot of room built in for questions because that's part of what makes this training practical and applicable. We want to be able to respond to what's going on in your communities, what your projects are facing, or where your knowledge base is. So please feel free to submit questions in the chat or Q&A at any time, and we'll get to them. Do you want to mention this at the beginning, but if you are joining in a little bit late, I do want to give a preview that we have some upcoming trainings in managing design and approvals and construction. We will be conducting that next month, December 8th. And we are also going to be journeying back to Nevada, to Reno, and to Las Vegas during the dates that are listed on the screen if you're interested in diving in more. And all of this, of course, is gearing up to a publication of the Nevada Housing Developers Guide in 2023. All right, so I thought I would run a little activity just to get us warmed up and getting to know each other. I'll go to the next screen and there'll be more information there. You can pull this up on your phone. It should be easy to access and we'll just find out a little bit more about ourselves. So you can go ahead and scan the QR code or go to slido.com and type in that number on the lower left hand of the screen. And just respond, where in Nevada are you from? I did this as a word cloud, so we can see how people self-identify, expecting some Renos and Las Vegases, but want to make sure we can include all of the places in between. Awesome, yeah, we're getting in lots of responses from Las Vegas. Rural Nevada, Fallon, several different Las Vegas descriptors, including Las Vegas baby, which is how I would say it if I was from Las Vegas for sure. Awesome. We have Boulder County, Carson City, Silver Spring, Fallon, Dayton, represented. Awesome. There's 50 people and it looks on the call, and it looks like only 21 of you have responded. So I will give it another second. Awesome. We have more people coming in from North Las Vegas and from Boulder City, it looks like. Great to meet you. Great to be here virtually. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next Slido poll. It's the same address, so it should come up on your phone or browser, wherever you're already logged in. But I want to get a sense for how many years of experience you might have in housing finance. And you can kind of define that as much as you'd like. Brand new or almost brand new, under a year, 1 to 4 years, 4 to 10 years, and 10 plus years. And we're already getting responses. And as you can see moving on the screen, I think it's interesting. This happened in Reno too, is that there was a chunk of people who are totally brand new. And there was also a chunk of people who had many years of experience. I think right now the brand new is dominating, which is great. So this should be a good training for you all. One to 4 years. And let's get ourselves up to at least the same participation rate as the last question. I know there's 50 of you on the call, so don't be shy. Awesome. It's looking like it's over. You're bringing down the percentage for the brand new. I think more people are filtering in on the other categories. For some reason, nobody has between 4 and 10 years of experience. I cannot explain that, but thank you guys for participating. Robin's laughing. Somebody's getting something out of this. The last question is about what you might want to learn about for the training today. So open-ended word cloud, what funding source are you interested in learning more about? Ooh, USDA, wonderful. As we mentioned, we're the rural team, so there's lots of USDA experience. Glad I kept that slide in. All sources, definitely. State-specific, LIHTC, anything and everything. Government agencies and CDBG. Rad, got rad. Requested alternative sources. PBV. All, of course, with a little smiley emoji. It looks like USDA and LIHTC have gotten a few votes each. And state tax credits. Yeah, there's, the national LIHTC program, and then each state has some additional bond financing available. Anyone else want to give anything a shout out? And we can look back at this data and it'll help us inform what to dive into in the guide. All right. Yeah, lots of LIHTC. Awesome, thanks guys. And I'm going to turn it back over to Robin to cover the first part of what is affordable housing.
Yeah, and we'll be quick about this. This is really just for us to make sure we're all on the same page with what and to go over a couple definitions together so that we can make sure what we're putting in our spreadsheets all resonates. Next slide, Ellen. So as we talked about last time, there's no universal definition of affordable housing. Affordable housing is a threshold that can work for any individual given their income. So you could have a mansion in Las Vegas and that could be affordable to you. So normally though, when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about housing that is built in mind for a specific or targeted area, like income bracket. In housing, we use the term AMI, or area median income, to determine which bracket that is and to help us think about those income targets. Do want to stress, affordable housing can be market rate in addition to being subsidized. This, we're going to talk about generally affordable housing that comes with a federal, state, local financing source that is going to have a land use restriction on it, generally associated with income targets. So that's going to be the focus of this, but want to make sure we all know that affordable housing is broader than that, right? Next slide. Oh, so many different words on the slide here, but really getting into the fact that area median income and what is affordable to different communities is going to change based on where you are in the state and what your HUD kind of specific area is going to say your area median income is and what percentage of that. So a household that earns $40,000 a year in the region in the community, like let's say an MSA where the AMI is 80,000 is going to be at 50% of AMI in that community. But if you lived in a region where the AMI is 80,000, so 100% of AMI is 80,000, you're going to be at 50%. If the AMI is 100% 50,000, you're going to be at 80%. Fun math. This is just the beginning of the math that we're going to be doing today, but this helps us to kind of think about where those calculations are. When we're developing affordable housing, the most common conversations and thresholds are 30%, that's very low income or extremely low income, 50% low income, 60% used to be kind of our ceiling for low income housing tax credits or LIHTC development. Now we have the ability to blend up to 80%. We won't get to that too much today, but just to know those are all available under low-income housing tax credits. Also USDA also funds up to 80%, CDBG and home as well. So those are important thresholds to keep in mind. That said, a lot of times states or other programs that are focused on extremely low income or low income might have thresholds for 50 or 30% AMI on top of that. Also, often we talk about workforce housing. We hear it called attainable housing. Those programs could go up to 120% of AMI. Sometimes they're home ownership targeted, sometimes they're rental targeted, but those AMI thresholds come in as well, as we're still talking about federal local programs that support affordable housing. Next slide. So here's just sort of you can see on the bottom, the HUD user portal data sets. Go to that website, you type in your county and it'll tell you what your AMI is for where you are. So lots of folks here are from Reno today. The median family income, 100% of the median family income in Reno is $96,500, right? That is then going to be variable based on how many folks are in your household. And then if you're looking at 50%, 30% in this is extremely low income, and then low 80% income. That'll help you to understand like what your thresholds are. Going to make a huge difference when we're filling in our operating pro forma. It lets us know what our rents can be, right? Because an affordable rent is generally thought of as 30% of income. And so you take that income, you divide it by 12, right? Then you take 30% of that. That's how much you could charge a household per month that you can put into your operating pro forma, and we'll kind of get into that as we continue through the session today. Next slide, I think, shows you Lincoln County. So just seeing how they differ per different counties is the intention of kind of what we're showing here. Different parts of the state are going to have different AMI thresholds. You can go to the next slide. Also want to make sure we're all thinking about what kinds of housing can be considered affordable housing and what can be thought through as we think about developing our financing. For a sale, rental, lease to own, and even cooperative housing, we see a lot of. Generally, when we're doing low-income housing tax credit development, we're thinking about a rental model. And most of the time in affordable housing development, we're thinking a rental model. But there are many homeownership programs that are targeted for, to be affordable. There's the USDA 502 direct loan. There's a USDA mutual self-help program. Habitat's programs or home ownership programs that are targeted to be affordable as well. And individual different housing authorities, CDCs in an area might have like something like a single family rehab program or a new development program that's also targeted as purchase, but also affordable. We have to think through what our existing site use is, meaning if you're buying a building that already exists, are you thinking about redeveloping it? RAD, the rental assistance demonstration project someone put in, that's a redevelopment project. Rehabilitation is more of like upgrading units. So generally keeping with the same units, but rehabbing them, not redeveloping them. Adaptive reuse is like when you take an old school building, for example, and turn it into lofts. That's what an adaptive reuse process would be. And we can also think about accessory dwelling units. There's some interesting pilots that are happening in some parts of the country on accessory dwelling units or ADUs. You can think about single family and multifamily and single use properties, residential only properties. So the single use would generally be residential only. We're talking about that in affordable housing development. A mixed use building could be a building that you have with commercial development, for example, on the ground floor, and then residential above. Next, I think we're good there. I see a question come up. Let me see where you are. Is gross income used? Yes, gross income is used in those calculations for rent. I know that's a tricky one when we're thinking about our AMI targets, but that is what we're thinking is about gross income as we're calculating rents. And we'll get a little bit into that further. This is a real important thing to think through though, and we'll get as we talk through what is a fair market rent and how what is available for us to charge on a project versus what is actually going to be affordable for our target population, and how do we reconcile those two things as we're building. Okay. So lots of stuff we want to consider as we're embarking upon financial planning. What are we trying to get at here, right? Are we trying to serve transitional, like from homeless population? Are we trying to serve a population that's in, a middle income bracket, like 60 to 80% AMI? Are we trying to serve more very low income? Do we have a need for a specific, are we focused on youth who are aging out of the foster care system? There's a lot of different specific programs that could come into play here, and something we want to keep in mind, because that'll help us also think through unit type and also what our rents are going to be. So that factors in who's going to live here, where is it going to be? That's always interesting. So not only where is it going to be, like where's the land the cheapest, where the land is the cheapest, does it have infrastructure, does it have access to amenities, will your folks have cars, how many cars will they have per unit? All really important things to keep in mind as we're thinking through financial planning. And man, y'all, parking costs a lot of money. So thinking about pieces along those lines too. Is it located in your transit where that could minimize some of those costs? All those pieces are really important. What's going to advance your organizational goals? Making sure what you're building aligns with your mission. If your mission is to serve extremely low income, residents, then building a low-income housing tax credit property that's blended to an 80% AMI threshold might not necessarily get you there in the best and most effective way. So making sure you're thinking about those pieces and the financial implications that each option that you undertake might have for how the project works out. When you're thinking about location, also want to make sure you're understanding the zoning and regulatory burdens of that area and what those choices might create. What the broader community is going to think about it. NIMBYism is a real thing, not in my backyard. NIMBY is is a real factor especially as we pursue new affordable housing development. And those voices are really vocal. So do we have, goes back to your development team. Do you have experience with doing this work? If not, who might you bring onto your development team in a consultant capacity that can help you with this work, or as a turnkey developer or developer partner? And any other pieces that could help you make these choices based on site location. Next slide. So excited to see so many of you that we met earlier coming in and telling us during the chat. So determining costs and assembling financing. On this slide, we've got adapting the structure to serve your development goals and meet your budget. Is there a graphic on here, Evelyn, that's not showing up? No. Yeah. Okay. So we often hear about, oh, it's animated. Sorry about that, y'all. We also often hear about hard cost versus soft cost. This comes into play a lot as we have conversations about affordable housing development. So just want to kind of think through what those costs are. So you've got land. Land is a base cost, right? Now that said, could you work with a local jurisdiction? Is there a donation of land that might be able to be reduced or be lower? Making sure that's factored in. Construction costs, materials, labor, grading, anything like that's done physically to the property is considered a hard cost. When you're asked about what your soft costs are, that's where you come in with like architecture, engineering, surveying, like stuff that you don't actually have like something that physical to kind of speak to that exact cost. Those are considered soft costs. I know this question comes up often. This whole stack is considered your total development cost, right? All of these three pieces need to be factored in. This is a big thing to try to figure out all these pieces and get into your total development costs. And this is going to shift, right? Any of us who've been working on affordable housing development for the past, several years, I mean, prices have changed so significantly, like from 2019 to 2020, and then year after year, and supply chain and some other things have really changed the way time costs are. So these are going to change throughout the course and the history of your project, but trying to get the best estimates you can early is really important as we think about it. We'll also talk a little about how to build contingency into our budgets. Often when we get into these conversations later about the gap, we'll see that there's a conversation that needs to take place that we call value engineering. So what compromises can be made in the physical structure to help us meet our goal? That would be considered value engineering. And one other thing to think about, like these projects cost a lot of money, right? And so as we're doing, if we're doing a $14 million development, do you have capacity and staff, for example, to project manage? What are the opportunities? Where are the needs for you to staff up internally? What are the opportunities for you to partner and to bring on others onto your development team? And how are you going to, who do you have on your team that can help you look at all of the funding available and who really understands the resources and can support you in this effort? That said, we can go to the next slide, but I do want to stress something really important. Oh, look, it says total development cost, just like I said. I do want to stress something really important. You can hire a tax credit consultant, great. I mean, I think that's great, or hire a development partner who has lots of knowledge in this. I highly recommend that, particularly if it's the first time you're doing this project. It is still really important to understand all these pieces in-house. As a developer, as a partner in development, because there are so many choices and there are so many decision points, and knowing and understanding the tools and the assessments for financial feasibility is really empowering to ensure that the project meets your mission, your vision, and serves the needs of the community that you want to serve. So I find it really important that the more that you understand that, the more that you can deepen the bench within your organization and folks who are working on the project within your organization. And I'm talking like the property managers, the project managers, and and of course your executive director, CFO, those folks understand this process, the better off you are, the healthier and more viable the project is going to be in the long term. And it's just, can't stress how important that piece is and why this training is so vital. So capital stack, you're going to hear a lot about a capital stack. And I think that this is because more and more we don't have developments that are all with one source. So in the 1980s, when the USDA 515 program, for example, came out, or the HUD 202 or HUD 811 projects were available, those programs allowed for the total development cost and the project-based vouchers, and all HUD was on a 202 was the funding source for 24 units, and that was it. You didn't have to go get low-income housing tax credits. You didn't have to go get a federal home loan bank grant. You had one, there was no stack. The loan was from HUD. They probably coupled it with vouchers. We'll talk about how vouchers factor into our stack. There was no stack. Things have changed a lot since that point. And so as with the advent of LIHTC, with the increased cost, we are having to add a lot of layers into that stack to get to an affordable housing development. So here you'll see in this graphic, the bottom is going to be your conventional debt, meaning a loan, like a permanent loan from the bank, like we would have for a mortgage, right, on a home. The top, that orange, that other half there, is going to be like tax credits. So like what equity is coming in from the tax credits. You're going to see a gray line, that's subordinate debt, right? So that might come in from a CDFI. Not every project will have all these layers, but kind of highlighting all the layers that go into a lot of projects. You also are going to see government programs. It could be home or CDBG, or maybe funds from ARPA, for example, or the Recovery Plan Act. So those could be under that yellow. You have grant equity. So this might be grants that are coming in from the Federal Home Loan Bank regionally in your area, or other philanthropy that might exist. Owner developer equity might be a deferred developer fee, and we'll look at how that plays into our development stack as well. And local programs, maybe your local community has a specific trust or additional dollars that can go into affordable housing development, something that like as the result of their inclusionary housing ordinances or something like that, that can also factor in. Local programs could also be come like in kind, like fee waivers, things like that, that could be factored in here. So capital stack is our funding or investment structure. The bottom of the stack is the stuff that has to get repaid in order of priority, right? And then the unencumbered funds sit at the top of the stack. I mean, it's the best kind of money to have, hardest money to get, because it's unencumbered and it's not secured by the physical entity itself. The more equity, the more of that kind of top stack you have, the more attractive it is to a lender and to a tax credit investor. So really important to think about how you can build these other sources into your project. Also, the easier it is to be able to make choices that help you serve your residents in the best way. Any questions y'all have as we're going through this, like hitting you with a lot of data up front, please make sure you're putting them in the chat or in the Q&A. We can go to the next slide. Oh, Q&A checkpoint. So yeah, anybody have any questions at this point? I'll give you a couple minutes to talk through questions. Evelyn, anything that you thought you might want to ask a question about? Throw me a softball.
Yeah, I guess I heard you use the word equity a lot. Is there a brief definition for it, or would you say it's more of an umbrella term?
So that's a great point. So equity is kind of an umbrella term for money. I'm saying that they for money that's not debt, right, on the total development cost. So if you've got a $13 million project, for example, and you have $5 million that's coming in from grants, that's going to be the equity on that stack. Maybe you have 2 million that's coming in for grants, probably a little bit more realistic. That'll be the equity in that stack. Same as we think about loan to value on a loan too. So your debt, your lender will not want to give above a certain loan to value on the project. And so that's where you also have to make sure you have a certain amount of equity. Generally, that's about 80% loan to value. How do ongoing operations over 30 years play into finance considerations? Great. We will talk about that a little bit more. We do have a 15-year pro forma that's part of our tool. And I will be putting that in the chat in just a second as Evelyn does some of these, this next piece of conversation, so we can look at that tool. That helps us to understand what it's going to look like as we pay off our debt over 15 years. We think about 15 years often because low-income housing tax credits come with a 15-year time frame that normally requires a re-syndication or a recapitalization, at the least a transfer of ownership at the end of that project. So thinking through what might be needed at that point is kind of how we project. We project out in 15 years, also because a lot of the mezzanine debt or that subordinate debt is done in terms of 15 years. And so it will require at least a refinance at that point. Question in the Q&A. Re-syndication gives you additional 15 years. Yes, so there's a little bit, this is a complicated question, and I want to make sure that we're clear that it gives, it's not the re-syndication itself. The tax credits last for 15 years. That doesn't mean the land use restrictions last for 15 years. Depending upon what's in your capital to stack and depending upon the actual timing of when your tax credits went in, the tax credits come with a land use restriction agreement. And so as a consequence, you might have an affordability restriction. You will have an affordability restriction that goes beyond your 15 years. It's just going to allow you to recapitalize, and that recapitalize might entail re-syndicating, which means going after another set of tax credits. That could be a 4%, often used in rehab. Get a little bit more into that, but that's a piece that happens. The program and the structure of the LIHTC investment is going to have come to an end at the end of that 15 years. And so that's how that's being thought of. At that point, the ownership of the entity will change structures, and there is an opportunity for recapitalization or to think about how you want to think about how you're going to refinance, restructure, rehabilitate, so they operate for many, many more years in the future. Okay. I think we got through all those, Evelyn, so pass it back to you.
Awesome. All right, now we're going to jump into some securing funding discussions and about the available funding sources for that gap in the capital stack that Robin was just talking about. I will say that if you were at the training in Reno, this is going to be a bit of a review for those of you, but I think it's a helpful one. So there's a few public sector funding sources that are available. In the form of a loan, you have the capital magnet funds. This is administered by the Treasury Department to community development financial institutions, those subordinated loans. You also have the National Housing Trust Fund as a source. So this resource helps with, you can use it for preservation, rehabilitation, even operating. It does target the lowest of incomes. So especially if you know that you're interested in a project with 30% AMI, this might be a good option because 75% of the funds for this go towards that program, to that population, and some of it's set aside for home ownership as well. So you can kind of jot down what works based on the structure of your project. There are also a number of HUD programs, just to go through them briefly. The Home Investment Partnership Program and the Community Development Block Grant Program are both, grants and flexible and available at the jurisdictional levels, right? So you're going to have to work with your local municipality and apply through there. The Section 108 loans through HUD are also available if some debt is helpful towards your project. I'm seeing some questions. HOME is an acronym for Home Investment Partnership Program. It's mostly just referred to as HOME. I think it's not a direct acronym, which is interesting, and I did look that up before this presentation. Also, somebody mentioned wanting to learn more about USDA. We can do a much deeper dive on this. If there is anyone with a rural project that's interested in USDA funding, I believe we have TA set aside for that, if that's helpful. But if you qualify as a rural area, there are Section 502 direct loans available for home ownership. Really, there's a running list on your screen, and you want to ask the question first whether you're gearing this towards a home ownership project or if it is a rental project. The rental would be the 533 or the 515. I think 523 is the voucher program, right, Robin?
And 523 is mutual self-help homeownership.
Mutual self-help,
521 is the vouchers that go with USDA 515. This is literally what I spend.
Yeah.
I spend a lot of time in this. If you have questions about that, send me an email and we'll talk more about USDA financing. Not a lot of 515 money, but there should be a NOFA coming out in January for the first time for some new development under USDA 515 multifamily. But yeah, just shoot us a direct question about that.
And so all of this goes under the Rural Housing Service at USDA Rural Development. So you're going to want to work with people that are very knowledgeable about that program to make that successful. We also have the Affordable Housing Program. This is through the Federal Home Loan Bank, so sometimes called AHP. So the Federal Home Loan Bank has a mandate to contribute 10% of its earnings towards the AHP. And this program can be used for construction, rehabilitation. It can be used for low or moderate income households. And really it's designed to leverage with other types of financing and to support, you can pair it with whichever target population you're interested in, like the homeless families or anything with special needs. It's going to be they have a competitive program available, and they also have a homeownership set aside. So again, with any of these programs, that's why Robin had that slide up with all of the questions on it, is before you even get to the stage of applying for funding, you're going to want to have some key questions already answered amongst your team. But a rental house for the AHP program has to have at least 20% of units reserved for 50% AMI or below, and owner occupied or home ownership housing has to serve households at or below 80% AMI. All right, and I have a few Nevada specific funding sources on the screen. Nevada has an account for affordable housing trust fund. This provides down payments, preservation of affordable rental housing, emergency expenses assistance, and homeowner rehabilitation assistance. So this, this is funding. This is available at kind of if you need that gap financing in your development project. And the contribution towards this program comes from real property transfer taxes. In the state of Nevada, we're going to talk about set-asides in a minute here, but Nevada legislation requires cities whose population is 500,000 or more, which I think would just be Reno and Las Vegas, to set aside at least 18% of revenue for the purpose of affordable housing. So that is to make programs available at that local level. There's also kind of more on the economic development side of things. AHEAD is another program that's through the AHP program that I talked about on the last slide. And so it's a grant that'll support targeted initiatives for new economic activity. So if you have a compelling application, you know, your this new development, maybe it has commercial space on the floor, or there's like a community center coupled with it. Housing, I think, is economic development. It is neighborhood character. It is a job creation effort. And so that's one example of a program available in Nevada that kind of asks you to be more creative and broad with what the housing can be used for and what the public service is, because it's also economic development. Also, if you're interested in addressing homelessness specifically, one of the things when you're adding up your total cost is that there might be more operating costs. With homelessness, you want to be able to provide services usually, whether that's mental health services, additional security for the building, substance abuse treatment services, and the Continuum of Care program through HUD is one of the available funding that's going to address that. So nonprofits, state and local governments are able to quickly rehouse homeless individuals and families while minimizing the trauma and dislocation caused to homeless individuals. So that's the supportive services that I was just talking about. And it's also meant to kind of coordinate between those service providers, you know, that are maybe doing more outreach in the community versus the, you know, folks that are property managers at the shelter. And the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Grant, if you're interested in targeting youth, is under that program. There's also an Emergency Solutions Grant. So that kind of is more targeted towards street outreach, the homelessness prevention, and kind of a wide spectrum of services, right? You want to have emergency shelters available, you want to have rapid rehousing and provide that entire spectrum to serve that population. So these kind of address some of those additional services that are going to come with it. And typically a new program like this is going to have to be stacked with a lot of other sources. So I was just talking a whole bunch and we have a lot of time, so I can kind of go back to any of those other slides that I was talking about if you have specific questions on those programs.
Just want to highlight, there was a PSH or Permanent Supportive Housing webinar that y'all hosted yesterday, I believe. So Coalition hosted yesterday. So I think there's a lot more to like learn or unpack about some of those sources. And that would be a great addition there. Also want to just be clear that home and CDBG can go to entitlement communities are clarified by HUD. And generally, again, it has to do with a threshold of population. So those are going to be really large metro areas that get direct entitlement, meaning they get money from HUD directly to do for CDBG or from home. There is the ability to establish a home consortium. That has to happen though at the local jurisdictional level. It can't happen at the developer level. So something else to be aware of. Otherwise, you're working directly with the state to get those dollars into your project. The balance of the state is handled at the state level. So Christine, it would be great if you could provide a little bit more context on some of those tools. Thanks.
Yeah, I just wanted to, you guys did a great job, and I know it's a lot of information, but I think for this audience, to the home funds in particular, in Nevada are the mechanism, the funding mechanism that actually triggers a property tax exemption. So for nearly all affordable housing development that happens in Nevada, they sprinkle, if you will, home funds into a project. Those are funds through HUD and have their own compliance requirements. So it's not something done lightly. And the hearings are different, public hearings are different. But I just want to highlight that because the property tax exemption plays a part in your overall ability to make your project pencil in the long run. And it's actually a policy initiative moving forward in the upcoming legislative session that funds like low-income housing tax credits should also be considered as a triggering mechanism for the property tax exemption. And we'll drop a link in the chat too. You covered the tools so great, and there's a little information as well on in our Affordable Housing 101 toolkit that's not going to be as detailed as the developer toolkit, but just on the different tools and policies that this group might be interested in.
No, thanks, Christine. That's actually really helpful. And we'll get into kind of our demonstration as we're looking through that demonstration tool, because property taxes are a real expense, right, every year. So really valuable to know that. Also really important because home, as you mentioned, Christine, comes with an additional layer of compliance, not just to access on the front end, but you have to make sure that you are using Davis-Bacon wages with this, which is a specific wage threshold, and that you're meeting Section 3 requirements, which is about employing local community members. All really good and interesting like factors, but additional layers of compliance that aren't triggered with other types of federal dollars. So really, so you've got a benefit of the tax exemption that comes with it, and yeah, different states handle that differently. And so really good to understand this particular nuance in the state of Nevada as y'all are developing in Nevada. Okay, so we're good on time, y'all. We're doing well. I think we're going to forge ahead. And what I'm going to do also while I'm talking through this is to share a link right here with you all. That's going to take you to, like I said, the native developer guide that Evelyn and I worked to develop on our team with the help of enterprise advisors. If you follow this link, and maybe I'll share my screen. So let's see how this goes, Evelyn. I'll do. Okay, I think you might have to let me share. We're working on this. Bear with us for a second. So you can see where I'm going. Here we are, and should be right. And here under tools, you will be able to see the development financial model, and then download the development financial model spreadsheet here. And that will take you to a download of a spreadsheet. This spreadsheet should come up. So as I'm talking, if you guys want to go through and pull up this spreadsheet, you'll see snapshots of this spreadsheet in the slides that I'm going to be talking about. So Evelyn, now we can go back to those slides. I just wanted to show folks how to get to that, and you can start playing around in this pro-forma tool. I know that sounds really exciting. I love this tool, and I think it's really important, and I get really excited about it. I know Excel is not everybody's love language or really motivating factor here, but really going to be an important tool for you to be able to think through all of these different factors that we talked together. So next slide. Okay, so we're back to that stack. We're seeing this stack is going to help us determine what our gap is. Like I said, our gap is often what's filled in with that stuff that doesn't come from your tax credit, that stuff that's not going to be able to covered by your primary debt service. So that can be even included in that. What you're going to do is try to figure out how to address that gap. What is your total development cost, and what do you get, right? Based on like debt or whatever else is going to come, you already know you have in the project, addressing that gap, and how are you going to aggregate and get all those sources together? So how the grants, the developer equity, the local funding sources you might have. I also always want to point out, and this is we'll get into as we kind of play with the tool a little bit, there's more than one way to get to a gap. The gap can also be minimized if you minimize your costs. So that, and we'll talk through what ways are to do that. So for example, if you have a large community room, right, in your property that has a cost that doesn't have rent revenue associated with it, if you were to lessen the amount of square footage associated with the community room, that would also in effect reduce your gap. We'll continue to talk through that as we get through. Next slide. Okay, so what is a pro forma? A pro forma is a way of projecting expenses. It is a tool that we use often. We're thinking about it in this workbook kind of format that you pulled up, or you should have been able to pull up from the link. Let us know via chat if you're having any issues with that. It's more than a budget. A budget is how much money you think things are going to cost, right? It's more than a sources and uses. It has all of that as part of it so that we can understand how much money we have at the end of the day and how much will be available to us. To Christine's question, you know, for 15, 30 years in the future, thinking through those projections. And it's very possible that the tool we build out tailored to Nevada will have could have a 30-year pro forma. You can build out some of these tools to have a longer term. This one has 15. It assesses a lot of different pieces. It looks at your operating expenses. It helps you to understand what your operating income is going to be, which allows you to ascertain what your debt service can be. And also it's a way for you to understand your unit mix, your unit count, and all of that. So it helps, can't say it enough, helps you to make a decision from a place of knowledge and empowerment. Next slide. So there's the components of this pro forma tool. You will see you've got multiple tabs. First tab on the left is instructions. Then you have development costs, operating pro forma, permanent financing sources. Oh, repost. Joanna, if you could repost the link, thank you. Permanent financing sources and uses. I don't really love that tab that much, and the 15-year pro forma. You'll also see in this tool that we'll have a list of terms that is just kind of helpful, like a glossary in here that will help you to kind of see what those terms are being used and instructions in the front end. This conversation will mean you shouldn't have to read the instructions, and we'll get like some understanding about it going forward. Your development pro forma is going to help you, that spreadsheet is going to help you understand how much your total development costs are overall. Your operating pro forma is going to help you understand how much revenue you're going to generate based on the units you develop and what their available rents are going to be. And then your sources and uses are helping you to think through that capital stack where you meet that. There's also the permanent financing sources, which helps you even calculate that further about how much, like all the different layers of debt and different layers of grant financing. Next slide.
Robin, what is a deferred developer fee?
Deferred developer fee. So deferred developer fee, we'll look in that stack. So you're talking about, you are allowed to take a developer fee. You are allowed, and I would say you are encouraged as a nonprofit to consider taking a developer fee and building a developer fee into the costs. It is analyzed, and it is part of the competitive review process to see how much is kept as developer fee and how much is deferred. And that can give you sometimes even a competitive edge, right, on your application. And it is the equity that you're leaving in the project and can be counted as equity. It is why we need to factor it in and then count it as deferred. There's also ways that you can figure out within your waterfall how to pay that back as cash flow becomes more available for years into the future. So deferred developer fee is the percentage of the allowable developer fee that you are going to put off taking in, not incurring as a cost at the front end of the project. Great question. Next slide. Yeah, to that point, there's a lot of jargon that goes on in this work. I am very guilty of using a lot of acronyms, and because I'm well versed in the jargon after over 15 years in this work, but I also want to be really clear. Don't let the jargon be a barrier to access. I think that often this jargon creates a barrier to access for this funding, for the ability to do this work. Do not let it. We can all figure out what these terms mean. Nothing is magical or very difficult about it, even though it's been made to feel very complex and exclusive. So there's a term sheet, like I said in here, that helps to go through them. One big one I talk about a lot, and it's really important, the debt service coverage ratio. You're going to hear it actually referred to as a couple of things. Sometimes you'll hear it as debt service coverage ratio, DSCR. And then we can also hear it as the debt coverage ratio. And just want to be really clear, it's an iterative process. So you're going to put stuff in here. You're going to see, it's like throw stuff in and see what sticks. You're going to put something in here and you're going to be like, oh no, we're like upside down on this project. Like we can't, there's no way we can develop this project. So this is a way to start. Don't wait until you've like done all of your visioning, until you've figured out exactly what you want to build to start thinking about your financial feasibility. Start thinking about this and getting into a tool like this early on as you're conceptualizing, it will really be helpful. If you wait until you're ready or you think you're ready to apply for tax credits or you hire to do this, you might have really misaligned expectations, right? And so it's really important to kind of think through this ahead of time. And to that point, don't wait until you need money. Start thinking about this. I hear that some of you are having trouble accessing the slide. So accessing the tool. So I'm going to show you again how we get there. So you have time. Okay. So here we are. You can see the screen. The bottom, it says download the financial model. And if we click here, we'll see it come up at the bottom. And then if we open that up, it'll take a second, it'll open up Excel. So there you are. So hopefully that helped with that piece there. I'm gonna stop sharing again. And then I saw a question about, is there a max percentage? Well, so I'll answer that question twice. Or two different ways. Is there a max percentage of developer fee? It's 15% is the max developer fee you can take as you're putting it into your application for tax credits. Generally, it's around 15%. It could vary. Often see like 10 and 12% as a developer fee structured in. I would plug in developer fee at a level of like 12%, but then you can defer 100% of that 12%. You just want to think of and count that as equity toward the project. The other way is to not factor it in as all, but then you're not counting the counter equity in the project as well, right? So if you don't count it as all, if you don't ever think about a developer fee, yeah, that cost is 10% less, right, of the project overall, but you're also not building in the equity that you've contributed, and you're also not paying yourself for your time, right? And you're not finding a way for that time to get paid back, either in restructure or in refinance, or how's that project as that project moves forward within the life of the project. Hope that answered that question. I think that was it's a really key and important question. Okay. And happy to, there is the ability to raise hand. So if you want to raise your hand and ask the question or have a little bit more of conversation with me, we can make that happen too. And Juana will help us to facilitate that as that comes up. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So we're looking at the development pro forma. When you're looking at your development costs kind of snapshot of here, things that you have to know in order to kind of start filling out this development pro forma. Land acquisition, how much is the land going to cost? Long-term ground lease or trust land is going to kind of make this more complicated. Trust land is not as complicated, right? So if it's like on a tribal trust land, the cost is going to be zero to the project. That said, I do want to make sure that there's a way. That's where Evelyn and I can start talking with you individually about TA, about how you can make sure you're counting that equity and you're getting credit for the equity of the land, because that land has value, regardless of whether or not it can be sold. Long-term ground lease could happen in the case of a community land trust, or like for example, the city owns it or a school district owns it. They don't want to actually give you land. They're going to give you a long-term ground lease. That's going to come with a yearly cost, which will factor into these pro formas slightly differently. So again, something to think about or consider, but could be a great way to lessen the total development cost of the project up front. It'll just become an annualized cost. And that's, in that case, generally much lower than what you would have paid upfront for land acquisition. This could be a tool of a community land trust mechanism, of a local government mechanism, or like I said, a local school district setting aside land it owns for affordable housing development and making that happen more readily. Planning, design, and approvals all of those need to be built in. Those are costs. Even if you incurred them last year, right? Before you're applying for your tax credit, like whatever you paid your architect, you want to make sure is built in as costs. Even if it means you can't pay like yourself as the organization all back, it's really important to capture those costs so you understand your full total development and how much has actually been invested and can be counted as owner equity. Site work and building construction, site work can be really expensive. So having a good understanding of what site work is involved, particularly true if we have any kind of like graded land that we have to think through, building in the side of a hill, mountain, for example, that can become really costly. So understanding that as we're looking at and making sure those costs are factored in. Make sure that there's amenities and offsite costs. So if you're going to build in, it kind of talks about it a little bit. If you're going to build in a large community structure, if you're going to build in a playground, if you're going to build in laundry facilities, those all need to be factored into your pro forma so that we can ascertain the square footage costs, the cost per square foot of development, and thinking about like how that can be offset by either rental revenue or additional grant equity or some other kind of equity that helps you to cover those costs. Okay, next. It's a snapshot. So you should see this tab, which is called development costs, and this is where you'll fill in all of those costs on your pro forma. Okay, I think we can go next.
And I would say that the template that we have is kind of generic template that our team finds it really useful to build out. Every application that you're submitting is essentially going to have something that looks similar to like this, and it might look a little bit different. For example, the cost per unit column might, a particular application might want to work out of that column a little bit more. Or another person on your team might be used to looking at it one way. So this can definitely be tailored, and you're going to have to be flexible depending on the specific requirements. But this is what we like to use.
Really good point. Your LIHTC application will have a version of a pro forma. It does have a version of a pro forma workbook. It's got a lot more tabs, and it has and I think it's a little bit less intuitive to use. So this is a place where I like to start. And then you can take the information that you've put in here and put it into any other workbook. The other thing that's interesting is like a lot of grants will require a different version. So those are all important to note. So thanks for that, Evelyn. This is a simplified version that can be used for sort of rough and ready financial feasibility analysis, and can be a really handy tool for looking at those pieces without having to do all of the math, because there's macros built in, and each page talks to one another within this 5. So it's easier to kind of feel like understand where the macros don't work, right? If they do, and macros is that kind of magic that happens in the spreadsheets where they talk to one another. So starting with the development cost, building that out, and then the next tab over, you'll build out your operating pro forma. Your operating pro forma is really key. Your operating pro forma is going to be where you fill in your units, like so your unit structure, I mean, how many 1-bedroom units, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms, what the square footage of each of those units are, and then what your ability, like what your rent is projected to be on each of those units. How do you know what your rent's going to be on each of those units? That's going to be informed by a lot of things. When we're first doing that, we might look first up with the fair market rents are published by HUD. So similar to that data I showed you about area median income, HUD publishes fair market rents for your area every year, normally happens around March, sometimes it's early April, where those adjusted fair market rents that are allowed by HUD are going to be published on through the HUD website. Looking through that to see what those FMRs are. What you might find though is that, like, for example, the FMR in is $1,100 a month, right? So that means that's a fair market rent because the market's so high. $1,100 a month, in order for that to be affordable to you, you have to make $3,300 a month. And so $3,300 a month, no, dude, I'm going to do math on the fly. $3,300 a month times 12 equals, let's see. I don't know. I'm doing my math, get my calculator out. Times 12, this is literally what I do. 39,600. So that might feel comfortable to you for that AMI, but you need to understand $40,000 AMI, like what does that equal in terms of your AMI targets? Are you trying to serve folks at 40,000 AMI, or were you trying to serve folks at, at $40,000 that AMI, or were you trying to serve folks at 30%, and you need to adjust that rent lower? That rent needs to be lower for those. So this all plays in, and that won't be done for you. You have to determine what you think is tolerable. We often have partners who are like, we don't want to charge that much per rent. We know that that's not feasible. Our residents all make Social Security income, right? And so they cannot afford, $1,100 a month rent. We only want to charge $800. There's definitely ability for you to put in $800 a month rent on your units. You just have to then factor in how much that's going to be able to, like that revenue, you're going to have a bigger gap. Okay, other things that are really important and that are in this operating budget. Trash, expensive to get removed. Snow removal can be really expensive depending on where we are in the state and what those thresholds are for where we are. It's only an expense for a couple of months often, but it can be a costly contract in those several months. Property management, are you paying an outside property manager? Are you paying salaries in-house? Those costs should be projected into your costs here as well. Are there other resident services that can be built in here? There's not a great place for resident services in this. Challenge of resident services they don't really factor in often, as we say, above the line as we're thinking about our costs. And it's why additional grant funding is often needed to cover those year after year. Cash flow by debt service equals, more math, so much fun. The DSCR, your debt service credit ratio, equals your net operating income over your total debt for the project. This is kind of showing you how the math is calculated. The spreadsheet will calculate these for you. You don't have to know these formulas. I just like to note how they get created. And often we're looking for a DCR of 1.15. Sometimes it can be a little bit higher than that. Q&A. Is utilities cost being considered based on a certain standard? Great question. So if you're working with HUD housing and also RD housing, there's a utility allowance you have to look at. You're going to have to talk with your local HUD office to figure out what they want to have your utility allowance to be set for in your area. It is normally like an average of costs that they're seeing in that market. And yes, that will be factored in. Two ways to factor in utilities costs as you're doing it. You might not pay, if you don't pay the utilities costs, the property could pay the utilities costs. That's what I'm trying to say. If the property pays the utilities cost, you don't have to have a utility allowance. If the property does not pay the utility costs, that has to be factored into what is affordable, because the rent plus utilities factors into your overall affordability calculation. Hope that answered that question. Cool. Okay. Oh, another question. Oh, yeah, you're welcome. So there we are. Okay, I think next slide, Evelyn. Okay, and then we have this slightly complicated but really interesting 15-year operating pro forma, right? And so what you're going to see in this 15-year operating pro forma is it's going to assume an increase of rents 2% every year. We know if we've lived in Nevada or Colorado or in many other states that 2% is not what has happened year after year. We have seen a lot more increase per year on rent than it would be indicated by 2%. This is a projection, and this is where tools can can fail, right? And I think that, so always take everything that comes out of a spreadsheet with a grain of salt. But it is important to at least try to calculate an increase. I will say, we're at a point where it's such high rents, it might be where rents stop increasing 2% every year, right? Maybe rents do level out for a little bit. And so as that happens, it'll just positively affect this pro forma. You're going to be allowed to put the costs in. I do think it's something for us all to be aware of, though, as we're developing new housing. We know we're at a level of really high, really high rents, right? It's part of what's driving inflation. It's a huge challenge, the increase in rent costs year after year in the past several years. And so it's very possible this is going to level out. It's also going to mean if we project that $1,500 a month rent, which we are allowed by FMR for the next 15 years, and we project a 2% increase, it could bite us. So it's something that if you're wanting to think about from a very conservative lens, like not only conservative lens for what your folks can afford, but what actually thinking about, like economic projections of where rents are going to go. It's something to think, just noodle on. A question about, I saw a question in the chat. Can you explain costs above the line and below the line? Sure. This is where the above the line and below the line comes in. So here we are on this, and this gets into deferred development payment as well. And this is actually a big enough little snapshot. You can sort of see how this is happening. So above the line is all this stuff on this top half, think in the top, like before the break in the spreadsheet. So your rent income, your vacancy, your effective gross income, your annual expenses, all of this gets informed by what you put in your operating tab and what you put in your development tab and your permanent financing tab. You don't type anything into this tab. This tab is created by you filling out the previous tabs. So these costs are above the line. So your debt service is always above the line. Like bank wants to get paid, right? How that, and if there's bridge loan debt service, that might get in above the line. This project didn't have bridge loan debt service, so it won't have it there. What we did do in this model is I did defer developer fee. And so we factored in that deferred developer fee gets paid back first before cash flow just goes off to the rest of the project, right? So, or it can be taken up by other sources. So you see there's $21,000 of cash flow available. Really, like after you pay off $20,000 of your developer fee, that'll be $1,259. What could be here also is your resident services, right? So let's say year after year, you're going to pay a resident services provider, you're going to pay that agency $20,000 a year. You can cover it because your cash flow available allows for you to cover it. If you are in a 202, like a HUD 202, a HUD 811, project with project-based vouchers, or a USDA 515 project, you are not allowed to take this cash flow, right? That's on this $21,259 cash flow, but you are allowed to write in your resident services above the line for a use of cash flow. So something to consider. It really just depends on your funder and what they'll allow in which part of your waterfall. Other things that could happen are asset management fees, soft debt. So it's sometimes what'll happen is a state might give you additional CDBG funds or something, for example, or a city, and they don't trigger payoff until the other debt service has been paid off or you have enough cash flow available. Those can come in that space as well. Okay. Next, I think there's a snapshot of the operating expenses.
Yeah, there's a chance I skipped a slide, and I'm gonna quickly exit out and then try to figure this out briefly. There was a slide on the operating pro forma.
On the operating expenses, yeah. So here's where you're going to put in this snapshot of this tab. Is where it's called the operating pro forma. The other was the 15-year operating pro forma. So those are the projections over 15 years. This is the day-to-day where you're going to figure out your per unit per annum expenses, PUPA. Some people say per unit per month, PUPM. And I heard somebody else say per unit per year, whatever, it's all the same thing. Your expenses at the end of a year or the end of a month that you're going to pay are extrapolated. There's a little line in the bottom right of that that says per unit per year per annum expenses on this project that we have in this model. This is just a sample, are $2,978. So super important questions. Are you going to serve multiple income brackets? So like I said, if you're trying to get folks at 50% AMI and your $1,100 a month rent works for $40,000 per year, which gets you at probably 60% AMI, what do you need to reduce it to serve a 50% AMI per, household? That's got to be factored in. You're going to have to change and adjust your rent. Even if it's the same 2-bedroom, you might only be able to charge $900 versus $1,100 for that set of residents. So you might want to break out 2 bedrooms, 80% AMI, 2 bedrooms, 60% AMI, 2 bedrooms, 30% AMI, if that's the kind of mix. This is important to, as Evelyn mentioned, programs like Federal Home Loan Bank, programs that are like to be competitive at the state level. Often you need to have serving lower incomes. And so making sure you're thinking through what rents can be allowed, those lower incomes. The only time that doesn't matter, there's a lot of things that come out in this process, is when you have project-based vouchers. If you have vouchers associated with a project, you can charge, or the project can get the full fair market rent as established by HUD, or the full CERQ rent as established by USTA to that project, and the voucher pays the difference between what is the affordability of that project and what is the income that is targeted for you to get on your rent. That's a project. A project-based voucher is associated with the project. Housing authorities might have project-based vouchers that you can apply for in partnership with them to get, or like a HUD 202 or a HUD 811. 202 serves elderly, 811 serves folks with disabilities. Those properties come with project-based vouchers. There's also resident choice vouchers. If somebody who lives at your project has a resident choice voucher that they come with into your project, they will pay 30%, but you could put them in a market rate or a high in the like an 80% income unit. This is really tricky. And then they're paying the full rent on that unit. That's always figuring out how those vouchers can be utilized and what your thresholds are and what your requirements are for your compliance based on who your funders are. So it could be your grant funders, it could be the home, the CDBG, or the like Federal Home Loan Bank dollars, or it could be your LIHTC compliance that's going to dictate that. It's also why it's super important that you have a team that understands compliance in the long-term operation of a property. What are taxes? And do you need to pay taxes? This Christine's point is really valid here, right? So on this, we have real estate taxes factored into this deal as a model, and that's $12,000, right, a year. If you could take off that $12,000 a year, that can change what you can make that much less per year in income, which can change what you can allow. Maybe you could reduce rents or subsidize rents a little bit better. One other thing I think that's really important here, and it comes up in discussion a lot, is when we're talking about larger units and looking at your fair market rents for larger units, and just being really key about who you're trying to serve, and what the size of unit they need. Often we're seeing like rents for a 4-bedroom unit and a 3-bedroom unit are not that different. What fair market rent is, and so if you're under if you have fewer people than require a 4-bedroom unit, it would be better off to build more 3-bedroom units to manage your operating pro forma. All really important factors. And I think that's where this kind of value engineering. Section renters, good or bad? And what are the pluses or minuses of having it? great question. So Section 8 is otherwise housing choice vouchers, or sometimes called Section 8 vouchers. So those are the vouchers that come with units. If you're an owner, developer, operator, it's great for you to have a resident come in with a housing choice voucher, because it allows you to get all the rent income you need, and it allows them to have the affordability of the unit. So that is, I will never say that's a bad thing. I think vouchers are real. I wish we had more vouchers, right? I wish we had more vouchers at the federal level. I wish we had more vouchers at the local level. Vouchers, and then a project-based voucher is also part. You need more vouchers here in Nevada. Exactly right, Chris. You need more. We need more vouchers. On the balance, this ensures, even if rents go up, even if we're doing this math, because this math is really hard and doesn't make sense. But if we had all vouchers, and that difference in what we need to charge versus what it actually takes to cover the right debt could be made up with vouchers, it would really change our ability to be able to get more people housed. So Section 8 vouchers, housing choice vouchers, project-based vouchers are all good. And that's my take. So I think we got to that one. Okay. Now, Evelyn, we'll slip through that one, and then we can look at the tool together. So I'm going to share my slides with you, and we'll talk through it. And we got 2 minutes, Evelyn, something like that. Okay. So I just kind of want to show you all. Hold on, I'm not sharing yet. Okay. Let me click over. Okay. I just kind of want to show you all, again, this is a mythical project that probably doesn't actually make a ton of sense. But it was based on a preservation project that I had worked on a couple years ago, right, with USDA. $70,000 land cost. That's probably a subsidized cost that happened. The city was ready to get rid of it, and it came in. You're looking at all of your construction. Make sure, as you're thinking about construction, you're building in a healthy contingency here. Never before has contingency been as important as it has been in the past several years as costs rise, right? And contingency should be, this one's 8.3, that's too low. It should probably be 10%, right? So if I build in a $300,000 contingency, what happens? 10%. Okay, so what I did though, and the reason I gave you a pre-filled in form, and the reason this tool has a pre-filled in form, is kind of to see what the results are of doing that change. That results in a change in my total development cost. This project is a total development cost of $4,024,480. We're looking at a hard cost per unit of $172,000. All of this per unit is calculated by the spreadsheet. You would only fill in the yellow. All of the rest will be extrapolated for you. It's in white. Go to your operating pro forma. You look at your unit mix. This difference in bedrooms you'll see is kind of as part of the difference. So you've got 3-bedroom units. There's 12 of them. They have 1,400 square feet, and they can garner $976 a month in rent. You've got 4 4-bedroom units. They're an additional 200 square feet, right? For those 4-bedroom units, they get you an extra $200 a month in rent. Does that really pay for the fact that your development cost per square foot is, where is the square foot here? Sorry. Yeah, is like 141. So you have to do the 141 times the 200 square foot. Often those are really tricky to think through, and something you want to think through as you're in that value engineering stage. Do you need 4-bedroom units? Are households actually that large, right? Something to note as you're thinking about what your rent expenses are. This gives you all of the different rents that you're going to collect for each kind of mix, and then your total. Again, if you're going to have multiple tiers, if like these 3-bedroom units you have 12 of, some of them are going to be targeted 50% AMI. This might be too high of a rent, $976. And so you're going to have to factor in 6 of those units at $800 a month rent in order to get that and extrapolate your income here. Right now, this project is at a debt coverage ratio of 1.15. We feel okay about that. That's a good debt coverage ratio. Your per unit, per annum expenses are showing here. Your management fee, $7,500, and you're paying like a salary for somebody to work on this project as well. So gives you an idea. These, as you fill those in, and then this is the piece that you're going to have to fill in. Let's say this is done with a non-conventional, a federal loan that has a 2.5% rate. This is probably done, but I think this is done with the USDA 516 loan for farm worker housing. You're not going to get a 2.5% conventional rate, but it gives you an idea of where you are. At this point, you have a 1.6 DCR. Your state is going to want you to take on more debt than 1.68. As you're looking for your tax credits, you're also going to be wanting to put in more debt. And so thinking through, and that's where like a secondary debt source could come in. We balance it to a 1.15 with that debt source. Also seeing you've got grant money in. This is coming from USDA 516. And then here you've got $250,000 of Federal Home Loan Bank Affordable Housing Program money built into that. What I'm seeing is that we have a gap of $50,000 right now. This is the gap. You need additional $50,000. One way you could meet that $50,000 is defer more of your developer fee. So let's say we defer, well, we didn't have as much as is really left. So hold on, let's say we for 82. See, then our grant, we have 2,000 left for 84. We're still not going to be able to really solve our gap with just deferred developer fee, but it is a way we can help address the gap. The other way we're going to help address the gap is see, maybe there's some home dollars that the state could put in this project. Maybe there's some other things that could happen. Maybe there's a local $17,000. That's not that bad, right? Like, so maybe there's another source that you can find. Maybe there's a enterprise section 4 grant you can get, right, to get through your pre-development and development. Those are ways you could address that gap. All 3 of these sheets together filled out will get you to where you need to be there, and they will automatically populate this 15-year pro forma. Okay, that was the like super fast, super like overview. I really think this kind of tool, it's more intensive than a back of the envelope tool. It is also more accessible than like a full, low-income housing tax credit workbook, and a really good starting point for you to think through financial feasibility, capital stack, unit mix, and a place to keep going back to as you're adjusting and you're thinking through what your ultimate project would be. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Evelyn to talk more about low-income housing tax credits, and please continue to put in questions and chat and Q&A.
Excellent. Yes. Any other last questions on Robin's section before we move too far away from it? Seeing none. Now we have our last section of today, which is going to go into the low-income housing tax credits. I'm going to start saying LIHTC. Hope that's not too jargony. I hope we're all there together at this point. And so the low-income housing tax credits are the #1 way of supporting the development of affordable housing across the country. It's something like over 2 million that have come into place since the 1980s, when the low-income housing tax credit was first created. It is an annual competitive process. It can be used for preservation. It can be used for rehabilitation. In Nevada, it is administered through the Nevada Housing Division. So we'll come back to that a little bit there. There are both 4% and 9% tax credits. 9% tax credits are going to be really competitive in every state you go to. They're going to be used a lot for new development. 4% tax credits are more often, I would say it's difficult to get to a full new development with the 4%. So most often I'd say it's used for rehab or for re-syndication. There's also additional state tax credits available in Nevada so that you can kind of layer, they work best if you're already structuring it along a LIHTC line. And that includes the multifamily bond financing program available in the state of Nevada. So that provides, it works similar to LIHTC, which is by providing incentive for private investors that lower ultimately the cost of affordable multifamily development or rehab. And so the state does encourage you to partner that with your LIHTC award. And the application process through that is going to go through the local government level. We're all, in addition to the LIHTC housing tax credits program, there is also other tax credits. So there is the rehabilitation tax credit, which some people also call federal historic tax credit. So if you are interested in rehabbing a building that is of historic significance, and there's a possibility that you're able to get that onto the National Register of Historic Places, that means that you are eligible for the RTC and can do an adaptive reuse project on that building for housing or for other purposes, I think. And then the new market tax credit program. So that's going to go towards community development and economic growth. But like the other funding source I was talking about earlier, you can get creative with, housing is economic development. I firmly believe that. So oftentimes, if you're working with a big enough syndicator, there's some really good examples of projects where, there's commercial space on the bottom or attached, or there's a community space or other purposes, community facilities, public uses in a entire package of development. And you can partner that between LIHTC and the new market tax credits and leverage it that way. It's a little complicated. It's on the table. Does LIHTC apply to tribal projects, or is there a counterpart? There is no counterpart specifically for tribal projects. A tribe or a tribally designated housing entity is eligible to apply to LIHTC, just like any other housing authority or developer. That comes with some unique challenges. I think that there are, there could be more LIHTC projects on tribal lands. I'm a firm believer in that. There's no reason that it can't happen necessarily.
If you're a tribe and you want to develop a LIHTC project, let us know. And we'd love to help you on that.
I'd be very excited by that. Yeah. It's possible. There's no separate set aside in the state of Nevada. And then before we get into this more, I had a few definitions I want to lay out and make sure we're all on the same page with. I'm going to talk about a qualified action plan. I'm going to call it a QAP. So this is what outlines the state's housing priorities, their rules and their criteria for allocating tax credits. So they come up with a QAP every year. It's required in order for the IRS to disperse the funds to the states. A bid package, we talked about this when Robin went through kind of the basics and how you get to your costs and get to your cost estimates. The reason I put it out in LIHTC is because the construction costs are going to be audited before you get your form that certifies that the tax credits can start flowing through. So you do want to not cut corners and really spend the time on a good RFQ to get those cost estimates in the door from construction or GC, so that it'll have to contain the scope of works, the specifications, the drawings, the conditions for the project or the job, and the schedule of work as well. The schedule of work is also going to be really key on LIHTC projects because the placed in service date matters a lot. You have to be able to kind of start and complete construction within a given time period in order for the tax credits to be triggered. So the place in service date is the date that an eligible family could, foreseeable, they don't have to actually move in, but like in theory, they could move into that LIHTC building and it would be safe and habitable and all of that. The place and service date launches the credit period. So for any new construction, this is usually when the certificate of occupancy is issued. That's going to become the place and service date. There's also a form. Tax credits are work. I should have had a visual for this. They're work from the state agency, the developer, and then the investors. And so the form 8609 is issued by the state housing agency to provide verification that the tax credits are now eligible to be issued. You know, the IRS, we're all good. This is a legitimate project. We've done the audit. That passes through the developer who has gathered the equity and the investments from their investors. Maybe there's a third-party syndicator in there somewhere, but typically 99.9% of all of the tax credits are going to be passed directly through the investors, and that's done through that form so that the investors can write off their tax liability, and that is, you know, the reason that they're interested in this deal in the first place. I mentioned syndicators. That is, they are consultants who can help bridge the gap between the various parties in these affordable housing transactions. So they're responsible for raising the money from the investors and also matching that money with low-income housing projects to invest that capital in.
They're separate from low-income housing tax credit consultants, though. So syndicators are, so you could work directly with investors. So maybe, like, for example, banks have a tax credit division, right? Like, so a Wells Fargo or a US Bank or something that has a tax credit division, or you could work directly with a syndicator. Enterprise is a syndicator, so is NEF. They're two nonprofit syndicators. There are also for-profit syndicators. Just want to be clear on that. And then a low-income housing tax credit consultant is another independent group that can help you think through all of this pro forma and can be part of your development team.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And, you know, low-income housing tax credits, they're lucrative. They are a way to get these projects built. That is why, again, they are one of the number one reasons, the number one sources for affordable housing around the nation, but they also come with their own compliance and their own complications. And so that's why, you know, both syndicators and tax credit consultants exist. Should developers thinking about LIHTC as a financing option be also building relationships with syndicators, or how do those relationships come about? That's a really good question. And I can actually maybe skip ahead to the slide that answers that question, which is a few tips and tricks if you're interested in working with lenders and with investors. This can be really overwhelming, but the thing to underline is that this is just like building relationships in any other line of business or in your personal life. You want to think through who the lenders and investors in your region and in the field in which you're interested in developing in, the industry you're interested in developing in, and proactively build those relationships, right? It's not going to be something at the 11th hour. You're going to want to have them already know your name, and your history of production and development. And you can also get support from other community leaders to make those connections early on. Every project looks different. We gave some basic examples in this, but you know, there might be something that looks funky on your budget sheet, and you're going to have to just approach them like people and explain, here's why the DCR looks like this. Here's why we structured it this way. Here's why this service, you might not have seen it before, but this is our vision for it, and get them on board. And you also want to have taken a course like this, know your pro forma, know your financial feasibility, be able to kind of come in with confidence that you have penciled things out. They're looking for that assessment, and they're going to want to do that. And securing a loan guarantee is a part of this process. You want to have everything kind of penciled out as you're going into these relationships. They'll have lenders and investors in this process are going to have their own checklists and due diligence that they're going to want to do. So they need to be assured that you're a good partner to work with. you know, I think they can expect there's going to be some back and forth, hopefully, but you want to be proactive with building those relationships. I hope that answered the question.
I will say that if you are awarded LIHTC, often syndicators, investors, lenders will approach you because that's published, right? As awards are made. The other reason it's nice to have these relationships ahead of time is because you know who you might want to work with, right? On these pieces going forward, and you might have gotten some estimated pricing earlier to build into your models. But if you don't know 3 different, you know, like investors, syndicators off the top at the time of the award, folks will approach you. These are just all tools for you to be able to like understand what those requests and questions are about. So don't worry too, like all really important tips, but don't stress if you don't feel like you have like a handful of folks. And also I would always get multiple bids for pricing for your tax credits and for your loans.
On this slide, I have a kind of timeline laid out because the cycle for LIHTC does have multiple key points. It's kind of confusing. But it starts when federal tax credits are allocated to the state housing finance agencies, and it's based on formula. So every state has a different formula that they get, and it's set each year. At that stage, that's when the state agency is working on their QAP. They're establishing their housing priorities for developers. They're putting out that criteria. And so the developers are going to have to compete in their application to argue that their project is satisfying the state's housing needs that they've laid out in their QAP. So once the applications have been decided on, developers receiving an award can take the tax credits and raise equity capital from investors in their development. So that's where the actual capital starts going into their projects, and they have the funds that they are needed for those hard costs, the shovels on the ground, the bricks and mortar, that starts coming to the project. And then tax credits are going to be claimed over a 10-year period, but the property must be maintained as affordable housing for a minimum of 30 years. So you're going to have to set up the property management, the qualifying of the income of the tenants over that period. And then, you know, I should have also put the 15-year mark in here. At that stage, that's when you're going to have to look at, do we have the cash flow? Are we going to resyndicate? Because we do need to keep the project affordable for 30 years at least. After that 30-year mark, you know, the project could go to market rate. That's kind of where preservation comes in, depending on where the developer and the property owner are at that point. And you can, another way to get involved in this is to look for those projects that are expiring through LIHTC and see whether or not you're a good fit for continuing to maintain those at an affordable rate. Credits can be recaptured for non-compliance. So maintaining supervision over the properties throughout the life cycle is really important. You don't want to have non-compliance happen. That's kind of the point of making all these projects pencil out. Your investors also, by the way, invested in making sure that non-compliance doesn't happen. So typically, and it will be different depending on from state to state, but typically the investors are going to have that compliance checklist and be walking that through with you as part of certifying the deal. They're going to want to assess that you are going to be able to make compliance, or it's not a good investment for them. So this slide, I want to get back to a little bit of the math. I think it's really key to understand the qualified basis. So this is how you calculate how much tax credit equity you're going to be able to get in your project. I have two sort of examples laid out here. The first one, I have the same construction costs. Let's go with 5 million. The first one, I said, you know, I want this property to be 100% low income. All of it's going to meet the 60% AMI. So 100% of it's going to be eligible for low-income housing tax credits. So that means that the basis is 5 million as well. At that stage, you input the tax credit percentage. I was able to successfully compete for the 9% tax credit. And so I am awarded for $450,000 in tax credits towards the total cost of my project, towards that $5 million. Please note that land is not a qualified basis. That's kind of one of the reasons it's essential to see if you can get any land in kind, or if you can get any exemptions on the cost of the land. The second example illustrates that what if, you know, yeah, but we need a lot of market rate rents, or I'm just interested in having part of this building be in market rate. It's going to be a blended, only 50% of the units are going to qualify as low income units. Well, that means that your eligible basis is only going to be 50% of the total construction costs. And that means that when you add in the tax credit percentage, you're only going to be able to raise equity through tax credits at $225,000. So you can kind of see any part of this, you can change the numbers. So if you are only able to compete for the 4% tax credit, you can then run the calculations again and see how that would impact the amount of tax credits that you have for your capital stack. If you have a different eligible basis, like if the total costs include the cost of land and you have to take that out, how does that compare? And kind of go through that. So this is a key part of understanding how your project pencils. So there's a question, is that low income percentage determined at the start or during audits? The answer is both. You want to make the decision in the pre-development stage as you're asking yourself questions about what you want to put forward in your project. You'll say, it's my desire to put forward 100% low income affordability, or it's not my desire. I want to have it mixed with market rate. But then you're going to need to prove in audits every time they come up that you qualified 100% of your applicants or your tenants. 100% of your tenants do qualify for that area median income threshold. They're going to have to submit with their lease information about their annual salary, and you'll have to have all of your papers in hand, or else that triggers the non-compliance. All right. I'm going to kind of skip through this so we have time for questions. In Nevada, I have on the screen the link that you can go to find about the LIHTC program for this state. Their criteria as of right now on their website includes project location, housing characteristics, project characteristics, applicant characteristics, tenant populations, including housing needs and individuals with children. Projects intended eventually for home ownership are a priority. You can structure it that way. The energy efficiency of projects and any projects of a historic nature. The link also lets you download a LIHTC pre-application checklist. I thought about pulling it up today. We're almost out of time, and it's a good thing because there were over 29 different tabs to go through just on one portion of the spreadsheet. So again, it might be nice to use the spreadsheet link that we sent out just to see how things pencil before you start diving into something that's going to be a lot more intensive if you're thinking about one of these projects. It looks like I missed a question here. I had one asking about the examples on the last page. So is the developer or organizer receiving a $450,000 or a $225,000 check from the syndicator annually to apply to operating costs? Yes, that is the short answer is yes, and there should be a place in the pro forma to build that in.
Not exactly. It's structured slightly differently in the way that it's structured in your total financing package. So that'll go to like the partnership for the financing. And it's built into your debt coverage, and that's where the permanent financing meets the LIHTC package.
Thanks. Coming up here on the end, I just have a few common barriers and tips on the screen here. You know, LIHTC, one of the disadvantages is you are going to be competing statewide for pools of funding. You're going to have to make sure that you're, especially a 9% application, you have all of your ducks in a row, and you're going to have one of the better projects for the year, depending on how much funding they have. You're going to have to make sure that you're able to align with the regulatory framework and all of the reporting and compliance that we kind of talked about. Sufficient capital is an element of basically any affordable housing project. You know, LIHTC, like others, you're going to have people double checking that work along every stage, especially making sure you have enough for the construction period to carry you through to when you can actually start getting any cash flow in the door. And then this is big for rural areas trying to work with LIHTC. LIHTC comes with a lot of transaction costs, and at a smaller scale of development, it's harder to get those to pencil because you're not going to have as much cash flow in the door because you're not going to have as many units, but you're still going to have to pay all of the fees associated with qualifying for LIHTC. It is important, if you engage with the QIP, if you really think about what Nevada's priorities are, and then try to match your project to those priorities, that is a way to guarantee more success. And with that, addressing multiple needs with your proposal or considering doing a permanent supportive housing project, those are really competitive. And also meet the goal of impacting the community on more than one level. You want to make sure you're clear on your regulatory framework again, and that involves making sure that you have the staff capacity and a distribution of roles where there's somebody on your team that understands that regulatory framework and that understands how to assess the financial feasibility of the project at the different stages. You know, maybe you're a beginner to tax credits and affordable housing, so you're just playing around with the pro forma for the first time, but you want to have someone else on your team that's able to work with that confidently. And you also want to build out those systems sustainably because, again, you have to stay in compliance for a total of 30 years. So that was just a really brief, really all of these topics. 2 hours is not necessarily enough time. And I do want to take another chance for any questions that are in the chat. Thank you so much. Sorry if I was speeding through things at the end. We really hope that this tool, this training is like one tool that your organization can use from wherever you're coming into this. And I think that there's plenty more to do in the state of Nevada for multifamily development capacity and resources. So here are, again, our emails. We'll send out a survey after this, and we do have upcoming trainings available.
Thank you so much. And I hope you all will join us for our next event next month on managing design and construction.